These old Appalachians are so rugged, yet so beautiful, but they are home to a unique set of people. These old mountains, some places, the sun don't even reach down in these hollers till midday and goes by the late afternoon. But these people thrived in these mountains, in these ridges and hollers, all up and down Appalachia, and their unique way of life and their accent. Now we're talking about the southeastern United States. Here's the states. Now there's all kinds of different southern accents in the southeast. You've got all kinds. You've got the coastal North Carolina accent. You got down here into Cajun and the Bay, southern United States, and then you got the central and Georgia and Alabama. But what we'd be talking about is the southern Appalachians. Here's what it is. From West Virginia all the way down to Alabama. These old mountain talk. And everybody talked normal and thought it was just fine. Until you leave the South and these mountains and you go to these big cities, then that's when you realize that, wait a minute, I'm not home anymore. And these people sure let you know about it. Call us all kinds of names, them old hillbillies and everything else. But I'm proud to be an old hillbilly if that's what it is. Our way of life is slowly going away. In another generation or two, it'll all be gone. And these old people, they're leaving us day by day. And this talk is too. This is a unique accent, unique to these mountains in southern Appalachia. So I'm going to share with you some of the reasons why these people talk this way, how they've always talked this way since they come in these mountains, and even listen to the voices of some of our elders and some of their secrets. Now these mountain people, they come into the East Coast from the old countries of Europe. Mostly in this mountains is Scotch-Irish, Scottish, English descent. They come into these mountains looking to live on their own way of life that they've been denied back in the old country. And they come into these mountains just before the Revolutionary War, or just after it, or just during it. And they had a rough time coming in here. Unmarked territory. A lot of them come in little wagons, little single bands, some come in big groups. But they had a rough time coming in these old mountains. And they brought their way of life in here. Their culture, their traditions, and especially their way of talking, their languages. And they set up little homes out of the wilderness, hacked their way in, and made them little farms, little old cabins like this. And this went on for generation after generation in these mountains. They were isolated from the outside world, except for their communities, maybe a small town down the mountain range. And some of them really had a hard time too. This is pictures from Union County back in the early 1900s. These people lived hard. This is before they had any kind of social programs or anything. But they lived off the land. They made it work for them. Like I said, this is what they know, and they hand it down generation after generation in these old mountains. And their way of talking is the same way. A lot of them didn't have land. They was new into the country. They got into these coal fields, and the Appalachians was full of coal back in them days, and it still is today. And these were tight-knit communities. These all worked as brothers, and it didn't matter what race you was, what nationality, what color you was. They all worked together as a team, and a lot of them never come home. But these old mountain people, they could make anything they needed. They either made it, traded for it, bartered, whatever, or they done without. They were a self-reliant people, and their way of living and their way of talking is a unique way in these America. Now I'm going to share with you some old voices of the past. This is Cage Cove before it became a national park. And this comes from an old guy family of Cage Cove, John McCulley. He was born in 1880 and died in 1961. But in 1960, he gave an interview before he died a year before of how life was in the Cage Cove. And I'm going to share with you some of his memories of how it used to be in these old mountains.
Mr. McCauley, where were you born?
I was born in Cage Cove in 1880.
Born in Cage Cove in 1880. Did you grow up in the cove?
Right there. Lived there all of my life. Never lived nowhere else but there until I park come and took our possessions over there, and then I moved out here. I've been here 23 years.
Well, let's see now. This is 1960. That means you moved out in 50, 40, 37, 1937.
Yes, that's about right. I guess that's right. 37, I guess.
How did you live back in the cove, Mr. McCauley? What did you eat, for instance?
Well, we had most everything to eat. We had lots of wild meat, and we made vegetation of every kind. It's a fine country there for vegetation. And I had a big bee yard. We had lots of honey. I sold lots of honey there. The 2 last years that I sold honey there, I sold 356 pounds right at my door for $20 a hundred. You couldn't fill the orders.
You had plenty to eat.
Plenty to eat. Plenty of fruit. Plenty of fruit. We had lots of fruit, apples, things like that. We lived like kings back there as far as that goes. My daddy was a great mountain man. When we got the crop in the spring of the year, we'd take the calves and the hogs and everything and take them to the mountain and stay a week with them till they'd get settled down, get stationary there, and we'd squirrel hunt and things like that, have a big time, catch ground hogs and coons and things like that. I've spent half of my life in Smoky Mountain.
Well, there's part of the interview of John McCulley himself, of how it was in the Great Smoky Mountains of Cage Cove before the National Park took it. And here's another part of the interview of how they took care of each other in these mountains and how the way of life was.
Figure, John McCauley, that life was easy in Cage Cove. How do you figure that things were easy in there to make a living and keep your family going?
Well, sir, I'll tell you how that I figure that. We looked after one another. If a family got sick and they had a crop out, and that crop needed work on Monday morning, we'd notice that'd be notified Sunday, at Sunday school at church. Let's go in down here on Monday morning and work that crop out. Well, we'd go right down there on Monday morning and work that crop out. You'd maybe be 50 people down there helping clean that crop out and take care of it. And if them folks died, I can mind in my time when an aged person died that there wasn't a man worked in the bottoms in Cage Cove until after that funeral was over with. Right there, they'd just walk right out and come and go home, go to the graveyards, go to help make the casket, and then they'd go help the people get to the burying ground, carry that funeral in there, and nobody worked till that funeral was over with. Therefore, that's why I think it was a happy place and a good place. We loved one another and worked for one another. And you'd see them coming in with a handful of flowers. They'd gather along the roadsides, and we could have a nicer funeral right there for $2 as I can have today for $200. Never cost nobody nothing. If it was a woman, the burying clothes was made, or a child, the burying clothes was made, and there wasn't too much on aged people, because they is all buried nice, but the casket never cost nothing. Never cost nothing to dig the grave. And I think it was a nice place to live, an enjoyable place to live. And then we looked after them folks. If it was a widow woman, she was took care of, and see that she was took care of. We had a family of little children, we took care of them.
Nobody wanted.
No, sir. Nobody wanted, needed for nothing. What one didn't have, another did, and he divided it, too. Yes, sirree, that's the truth. I think it's the greatest place in the world. It's a paradise to what I'm living in now.
Well, there you go. That's just how they took care of each other in these old mountains. And not just in this area, but all up and down these old Appalachians. That was a way of life for mountain people. They took care of their own, and they seen after each other. But them days are slowly, surely going away. Now here's another little voices of the past. Let's go 100 miles or so north into the coal fields of southeast Kentucky. This is a rare, only recording I have of my grandmother. This was back in the late 70s. And here's her talking to my uncles about seine hunting and just hunting in general.
For how much it was, but I forget. You know, you said $58. I was in boys digging pounds. That Tom Upton told me in 30 days he took $145. Well, that's right. I'm going to try that dog out maybe 2 weeks, and then I'll tell Bill Buck that pig. It's wood. Yeah, you might get sick and die back there. Well, if I do, I'm going to be good insurance. I wouldn't. Where y'all been towing? Have you won't be there? Probably Monday morning. Yeah.
Well, that's the only recording I have of my grandmother. I wished I had so much more. I'd sit around and talk to her all day long of all of her little stories she told me, and I miss them so bad. She could really control a house full of rowdy children with her little stories of all kinds to keep us in place. Well, that was my grandmother talking. Now, these little communities all up and down these Appalachians, just little small towns, growing up, and they were isolated. But it's not that way no more. Radio, telephones, internet, everything has changed. The old houses up a country holler, they're still there, but nothing like it used to be. Our way of talking and our way of living is slowly changing, like this old car. It's still there, but it's a thing of the past. And I'm just trying to remember how things used to be and how I want to continue our way of talk. Now I'm going to share with you some old sayings and old words of these country people, how it does and how it still is in a lot of places. Like we used to go to the old country store. We didn't call it shopping in them days. We called it trading. I'm going down to the store to do some trading. That means going shopping. That was a country word for it. And an old pop or a soda, we called them pops here in the mountains. And an old poke, people, especially when I had to go up north for a little while, they'd make fun of you. What in the world's a poke, son? It's a paper bag. That's what an old poke is. That was the old country name for it, an old poke. And we didn't call them potatoes, called them taters. Didn't call a tomato, we called them maters, an old mater. An old bag of soup beans, that was pinto beans, but we called them soup beans. And when things stink, we didn't say they stink, they stank. So instead of stinks, it stanks. That stinks. And an old banana, we called them nanners. That was just the way it was. And we listened to all these old ghost stories around in these mountains and all these mysteries. They didn't call them ghosts. Our elders taught us to call them haints or spooks. Just an old haint story. Like an old raccoon, animals, we called them coons. A bear, a bar. And an old house window, we call them winders. Didn't call them window. Didn't call a child, we call them a youngin'. And around the house, when it come, you didn't have a washing machine, you had a washer machine. Not a washer, but a washer. And the shingles on the house, we called them shingles. You got some bad shingles on your house, don't you? And just talking in general, like over there, it's over yonder, or down yonder. And not a hollow, it was a holler. Up a holler. And some called it a creek, some called it a creek. It just depends. And like an old tire on a car, we called them a tar. T-A-R. Or a tar could stand for something else, like a cell phone tower. It's not a tower, it's a tar. That's just the way they talk in these old mountain language. And you didn't wash clothes, you washed clothes. We washed them. W-O-R-S-H. Wash, not wash. And back in them days, well, we still say the same thing. You didn't get a spanking, you got a whooping. Or a switch. Had to go break off a switch to get a whooping with. That's just the way it was. And didn't call a chair, called it a char. Go get me a chair. That's just, and here is yar. Fire is bar. Just stuff like that. And when you want to holler at somebody, it's supposed to be yell at somebody, we call it holler. Go holler at so-and-so. Or you all. Just the old sayings. And we didn't throw things, we slang it. Throw it across the room. Slang it across the room. That's what it is, old slang. Just some of the old country words. There's so many of them. It's just a dialect of long ago that was just mixed with the English language from back in the old country, Scottish, Irish. It just slangs, it stuck here in these mountains, and it stayed that way for generations after generations. And there's just so much on this history. And like I said, everybody's connected with the outside world so much, and our schools, that our way of language and our slang is slowly going away. So I'd give it another generation, maybe two, it'll just about be gone. But the southern language will always be here. Just this dialect is not as strong as it used to be. Now these old people, they were firm, God-fearing people, hard-working people in these mountains, and their way of living and way of life. So I just thought I'd share it with you. So please, if you can, if you have any of your elders left, record them. Get their stories. Pass it on down through the generations. There'll come a time that this will all be forgotten. So I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. So God bless, and I'll see you next time.